Hey, Ruckus Makers. Today we are joined by Dr. Leena Bakshi McLean, who's the founder of STEM for Real, a nonprofit professional learning organization committed to combining STEM and standards based content learning and leadership with principles of justice centered pedagogy. She currently serves as the director of multicultural education and equity for the National Science Teaching Association. Leena has worked with pre service teachers at UC Berkeley and Claremont Graduate University, teaching STEM methods and universal design for learning. She is also the author of the children's book, There's Something in the Water, a story that highlights the real life of Dr. Tyrone B. Hayes, an endocrinologist from UC Berkeley. As a woman of color and a mom of two girls, access and opportunity in STEM are personal in STEM, we must create an identity in STEM. Her doctoral dissertation was on the successful implementation of STEM initiatives in lower income schools. And Leena travels the world as a keynote speaker, inspiring audiences in education, leadership, and technology to think about equitable STEM education and how to ensure access for all. Her next book, Teaching and Learning in STEM, hashtag for real, will be coming soon in October of 2024. Dr. Bakshi McLean, welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you so much for having me, Danny. I'm so excited. I'm a big fan of your show, and it's great to be here and to make a ruckus.
Making a ruckus is what it's all about. So thank you so much again for being here. And I want to start with a story, Lino, where there was a computer science fair, and students were being uninvited from that experience. What was going on there?
It was so wild. Every time I look back and I think about that story, it was so exciting to have this opportunity to work with the students from the court and community schools and teach them coding. So,
Hmm.
people in our group, in our department, they were working with them one on one, hands on, working on computer science, on app development, and whatnot. And we were hosting the first and unfortunately last computer science fair. And
Hmm.
one of the takeaways was to have students from the court and community schools attend the fair and present their work as well. And in the planning and the development, everyone was really excited. And all of a sudden, we started hearing whispers of, is there going to be enough security at the university? Have we connected more with the chief of police? What's going on? And next thing you know, it was a very surreptitious, why don't we just not have them this year?
Hmm.
And we can just revisit it next year. And so that's what happened. That was an actual memo that got sent out and sent up the chain and said, we're going to uninvite these students, especially after the hard work that they put in. And and so we just had to live with that decision, and we thought, wow, is this really happening in this century?
Right. Yeah, that's wild, unfortunate, horrific. I mean, there's so many words I can use there. What was it like? I mean, did the students find out? Like, how'd you bounce back from this?
I'm so grateful. I really hope the students never found out. I really hope that we shielded them from the disgrace that occurred, that adults were responsible for. So, if
Yeah.
anything, as much as I tell and retell and recount this horrific story, I really hope that it never gets to the ears of these students, because they did nothing. They were just
Right.
so great, so great, so gracious. And the great part about the story is that it was a happy ending, and then they ended up at the computer science fair. However, yes, definitely ruckuses were made.
Yeah. Well, tell us about how you did make a ruckus and how the system responded, because you said there was a happy ending, which is great, and I wouldn't have expected that, but looks like you made it happen.
Yeah, I was so grateful to have a united front in terms of the department that we were in, kind of middle
Hmm.
management there, and we all said, this is wrong. we can't sit here and have this mission and vision for serving underserved minorities and youth, and yet here we are attempting to serve them, and decisions like this are happening. So
Yeah,
we
pull
spoke
the
up
plug.
one by one collectively, saying this is the data, this is what's happening, this is what's not happening. And it was really nice to have a team all have that united front to be able to say this is not okay. And but it did not go well. So when we did speak up, there was pushback, especially from the higher levels, when they said, you know, this is a decision that was made already, this doesn't involve you. There were a lot of closed session, closed doors meetings, closed door meetings that were occurring. And that's where we had to really push back and push the doors down and say, hey, I really hope that they are getting invited. There were some text messages, you know, so all
Sure.
that to say that we really had to push and fight.
Yeah, push it, fight, advocate, for what was right. If you had one piece of advice for a leader who is doing great things for kids, and especially kids of color, and they find themselves with the force of the system pushing against them, what would be that piece of advice, right? So that they could have the positive outcome that you had.
I always tell people, if you're doing this work with a squad, this is going to help you
Right.
when you encounter moments like this, when
Hmm.
something happens. Because I look back at that time, and I just happened to have, you know, my Justice League, my squad that was doing this work, embedded in learning about equity, understanding the nuances and the complexities around it. And so when one person says, hey, this isn't okay, there's a domino effect. Like, yeah, that's not okay. What's
Yeah.
going on? I don't know what if I had encountered that situation and it was just one voice, it was just me, the bravery necessary in being able to stand up. So I always tell the leaders that I work with, find your squad, find your people.
100%. I say, well, I don't say, Greg Sachicoli wrote a book, The Enemies of Excellence, and the number one enemy, he talks about 10, but the number one is isolation. So you got to find your squad because we're better together, right? And doing hard things is so much easier with the support of community. So you mentioned Justice League though, Lena, right? So does that mean you're a DC girl? Like you didn't say Avengers and Marvel, and I don't know if that's a thing or just the metaphor you used.
I have to dabble. You know, every single
Yeah.
other movie is a Marvel movie, so I think it
Yeah, yeah.
definitely comes with the territory. But I just love, you know, that idea of being able to come together in a collective fight, in a collective effort, and that is so much of what
Yeah.
we do, especially in our niche of education and educational justice and liberatory education.
I love that. And one more just fun fact, because I have to get it out of my system, so I apologize. But I love comics, right? And I read them still. I have two Spider-Man toys that I'm looking at. And anyways, Eisner Awards for 2023, DC had way more nominees than Marvel. But Marvel has figured out, probably with Disney's help, the formula for a great movie. And that's why they just keep cranking them out because we consume them like crazy. So I promise I hope that's the last comic book reference. I want to make this show about you.
But I have to add to your comic book references the idea of representation. And I
Mm,
just remember, you know, seeing an Asian American man, seeing Black
100%.
Panther, being able to
Yeah.
see ourselves in Marvel. It's great, and it just does a lot for, you know, what we want. And of course, there's nuances when you look at the storyline and like, well, they could have done this and they could have done that. Well, if they're doing it, and we're starting the conversations of having representation.
100%. Yeah, representation so important. That's why, BLBS, we have two women's focus groups. We're launching, I'm so excited, our first BIPOC cohort for our community. And it's just great places for people to plug in, to feel safe. Representation matters. So 100%. So let me ask you this then, because there's a connection to what we were just talking about in terms of that computer science, and the kids were uninvited, but we had a positive outcome at the end. And you said on paper, right? Like the vision was folks wanted this equitable, like, experience and all this kind of stuff. But then in reality, they're talking about police and uninviting kids, and this it's just crazy. But what's going on there? You know what I mean? When you have the vision that's saying the right stuff, but in practice, it doesn't exist.
I think, and I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I think as leaders, we have an attachment to our titles. We have an
Hmm.
attachment to, I'm the assistant superintendent of curriculum
Okay.
instruction. I'm the, principal of this school district and this school. And with completely understanding the plight of being able to go through the system, get your credentials, go through all of the interviews just to finally make it, and then the risk
Hmm.
of jeopardizing it, so that because you know what's right. I think there's a lot of that complacency and just, well, let's just kind of be quiet, go under the radar, and not make a ruckus, not ruffle any
Yeah.
feathers. And I think that is exactly what keeps the system in the system that it's in. Just, I'm just going to stay here and I'm just going to do my thing. No one asks
Mm.
questions. Everyone's happy. I get my paycheck.
Right. So correct me where I'm wrong because I'm still a little fuzzy. You're saying like because of the title, people are comfortable maintaining the status quo because that won't threaten, I guess, career aspirations and and what they've worked so hard to attain. Is that what you're
Exactly.
sharing? Mm.
Exactly. Like, and then, because the title comes with so much. It comes with the career aspirations. It comes with
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
salary. It comes with the corner office, perhaps. So much comes with that. And of course, the fight and the hill to get there,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's very difficult to say, hey, I don't think we should do this. I always say one of the quotes that I always tell people is, are you going to sit down in compliance, or are you going to stand up for justice? And
Mm.
when you take a stand, that comes with a risk. That comes with being ready to detach from your titles. And I can speak personally. I was, senior program director of science.
Mm.
Wonderful. It sounded beautiful at the county office of ed. And that came with, well, do I want to face that title? And am I willing to risk it? And at the time when I did risk it, I didn't have a family. I
Sure.
had fewer, I had more room for risk, let's just say.
Gotcha.
And so I look back and I think, would I have done it again? And I think the answer is absolutely, because now that I'm a mother of two children, I have to stare my children in their
Yeah.
faces. I want them to know, hey, this is what mommy's been doing all day, and this is why.
Mm. I tell leaders, right? Like, I mean, you gotta you put your head on the pillow. You gotta be able to sleep at night, type of thing, right? So, are your actions in alignment with your values and that kind of thing? And there's an author, John Amaechi, former NBA player as well, but he said people make choices, choices make culture. And I think that's what you're talking about. And one more, just sort of a meta insight for the person watching our podcast or listening, what Lena's talking about, people make choices, choices make culture here. And as leaders, you got to define like the continuum and where people are. So you said you can, I think you said sit in compliance or stand in justice. Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yeah.
And one that the tension I'm often playing with, I call it play it safe principles, those maintaining the status quo versus the ruckus makers who are designing the future of school and challenging the status quo. So as leaders, you got to make those distinctions. And I really love that sit or stand, that resonates with me. So it's a beautiful idea. Appreciate you sharing that. So let me ask you, how a focus on testing and assessment actually can divide students of color from accessing great science programs.
That is such a great question, Danny, because again, as leaders, we're always looking at the test. Even if we say we're not teaching to the test, we really secretly want to, because we want those test scores.
Right.
And the research shows, focus on the whole child, focus on dynamic instruction, look at teaching a well-rounded set of instruction, thinking about the arts, thinking about science, thinking about music,
Mm,
and you'll get there. So we have this set of research that supports that work, and yet here we are taking emergent bilinguals and emergent multilingual learners, taking them out of the classroom during science to give them more reading, or to take students that are struggling in math and giving them more math. Just all these systems and practices that are not aligned to the research, but we're in that desperate striving for those test scores instead of going back to the whole child. And what happens is, unfortunately, STEM and science are the first programs to get cut because
yeah.
they're not tested as often, they're not tested as
Mm,
heavily as mathematics and ELA. And then you see, especially in lower income school districts, that is where students, especially students of color, they're now losing their access to rigor and relevant STEM instruction. And we're
mhm.
actually having principals inform and direct their teachers not to teach science and not to teach STEM because you don't have time for that. So focus more on reading, writing, and math, and less or not even science at all.
Mm. There's so much to say to that. The one anecdote I will share, I remember being in Chicago public schools, and to your point, they were worried about scores, right? Test scores. And
Mhm.
so the brilliant solution was just let's add more instructional minutes for where our scores are low. But they didn't change the core, which is the quality of the instruction happening, right? So just more of what you're already doing isn't going to create a similar result. And they did cut sciences and this kind of stuff, and they did cut the arts, right? And PE. But the interesting thing about the folks that made that decision, their kids didn't go to the public schools. They went to these private institutions that had an abundance of
Yeah.
the whole child experience. And it's all it's the two systems type of thing. I'm preaching to the choir right now. Yeah, but that's the one thing I relate to. So um, let's get into your framework though, the STEM for Real framework. I'm really curious about that. And so, what goes into the framework?
Yes, yes. Well, I also want to add about chronic absenteeism and
Okay,
this idea that, oh my gosh, well, what if we made instruction fun again, and
imagine
we
that.
focus on that? Like, imagine what happens with students that actually want to come to school, and that's exactly the basis of our framework. And we started out with connect, create, cultivate. And that first part is connection, and not just connecting with our students, it's connecting with our families as well. And a lot
Mm,
of family and community engagement has been relegated to the counselors or the administration. And we want to bring that family and community engagement back to the teacher as well. And so I'm sure teachers listening, they're like, are you serious, Lena? Not another thing on our plate. But I remember going to a conference early on in my career, and a teacher, and it was on parent and family engagement. And the teacher said, what if I don't have time to call the parents? And the presenter said, you don't have time to not call the parents.
right.
And that was my moment of, wow, if I just take this opportunity to establish connection with parents, establish that invitation into the learning space, into my learning space that I get to create for our culture, it really changes the game for the rest of the year. And so that's what I wanted to build in. And then as a pre-service teacher, we got to learn about our students through an ethnographic experience. So
Mm,
understanding the students, their families, their hopes and dreams, understanding the context of our school and the community, the history of the community, and all of that really contributed to the teacher that I became. And I thought, well, why do we stop after pre-service teaching? Like, this is such a great practice. How do
hmm
we keep it going? And that's the formation of the connect. And I think especially with social emotional learning and establishing, again, going back to the whole child, looking at MTSS frameworks on academic, behavior, social, emotional, all of that boils down to getting to know your students and their families. So that's our first main bucket.
Got it. Connect, create, cultivate. A lot of emphasis on connect. You develop those relationships. Everything else is going to flow out of that, right? And so it's one of those. If you don't address it because you think it's extra or something more to do, in the absence of those relationships, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle all year. So would you rather do that or actually take the time, establish really strong relationships, and maybe we go downhill? Can you imagine a school year where it's actually easier because you have those relationships set up? So
Exactly. And that's
yeah.
where the create comes in because now
Tell me
we
more.
establish that connection. We know about our students, we know about the families. And the most important part is that we know about the cultural capital that students can now bring in to the classroom and to the learning experiences. So now teachers and leaders, we can create our what we call our 3D 5E. What are students doing? What do they need to know? And how are they thinking about their instruction? And then that goes right into all the principles of universal design for learning, engagement, action and expression, representation, all of that, all these frameworks. I always
Mm.
call it, TMI, too many initiatives, but it can all come together in our create. And that's really the basis of our culturally responsive instruction and culturally relevant instruction is going from connect to create. We get to create the lessons, observe each other, analyze student work, monitor our students longitudinally throughout the year, and then that leads right into cultivate, where are we cultivating a sense of belonging based on teacher
Yes.
observation, student observation? Our students, do they feel like they belong? Are they participating? Are there academic discourse supports? Are the students doing the heavy lifting of the sense making? And most importantly, which I think is a little bit of our not so secret sauce, and that is reflecting on our own implicit and explicit biases in the
Mm.
instruction. And that can really get at the principles of anti racism, anti bias, justice centered pedagogy, and really looking at that liberatory experience for our students.
Awesome. Well, I want to dig more into belonging in just a second, but we're going to pause here to get some messages in from our sponsors.
Awesome.
Learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with Harvard's certificate in school management and leadership. Get online PD that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading school strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. You can apply today at betterleadersbettersschools.com/Harvard. When classrooms come alive with conversation, teachers and students will thrive. Last year, teachers using TeachFX increased their student talk time by an average of 40%. Can an app really do that? Even trying something like embracing extra wait time to create space for student talk can feel like a risk. But with TeachFX, teachers see the power of those practices in their own classroom level data. It's like having a personal instructional coach on your phone, tablet, or laptop. Ruckus makers can start a free pilot with your teachers today. Go to teachfx.com/better leaders to learn how and get started. As students progress through their K through 12 experience, schoolwork gets harder and more complex. Yet, at the same time, students are asked to do more and be independent with their learning. Young people struggling with executive functioning skills will fall further and further behind. The pandemic only made things worse. The remedy is found in equipping students with executive functioning skills. And our friends at Organized Binder have released a new self paced course that will teach you how to teach executive functioning skills and set your students up for success. You can learn more at organizedbinder.com/go and set your students up for success. All right, we are back with Dr. Bakshi McLean from STEM for Real. And recently we were just discussing your framework, connect, create, and cultivate. And you were talking about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is this idea of belonging. So, can you riff a little more on how STEM for Real helps schools create more belonging for students?
I will, of course, I know you're a storyteller and I am too. So I will go ahead and start with a story from one of our, we call them netties, people in our STEM for Real network, they're netties.
Yeah, I
And
like it.
one of our teachers, she said, Lena, I was looking at the data in our lesson study cycle. I was reflecting on a lot of the issues that I was having. And when I did my grades, I noticed that I gave that a lot of, all across the board, her Black students received unsatisfactory marks
Hmm.
on their report cards. Now, this teacher could have done one of two things. She could have easily said, Black students are so misbehaved and blah, 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 which
Hmm.
is unfortunately a lot of the rhetoric that happens, and it leads into so many of the detrimental stereotypes that sit on the shoulders of our students of color. So she could have easily gone down that road, and she didn't. She said, Lena, in this work I stopped and I interviewed every single one of my students, and I just wanted to talk to them and say, so what is it like being in this class? What can I do to support your learning? And each and every one of those conversations led led to just wow, no one has ever her students never experienced a teacher just asking that question.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that is the be all and end all and the one, solution. However, that's a solution that worked for this teacher where she took the time to reflect and to take a risk, to try something new, to innovate. And I think that is what we want to inspire in our teachers and in our coaches is being able to have that innovation and that risk taking to dismantle so many of the stereotypes that exist.
Hmm.
And now she cultivated her sense of belonging.
Beautiful. Any last ideas, Lena, in terms of making a ruckus in education to help rebuild it better and more equitable?
I always say when we work with our leaders especially, we say, the system has been built on the basis of inequity. You go all the way
Hmm.
back to Thomas Jefferson, and it was the scholars versus the laborers, and then
Hmm.
you travel down history even more to Brown versus Board of Education. There's Our history is on a rocky foundation when it comes to our schools. And so one of the things that I always work with leaders is being able to recognize, dismantle, and rebuild. So recognizing the inequities that exist. We can't be a ruckus maker if we go in and saying, I don't see color. Everything's
Yeah,
great.
right.
And we just need to be more engaging. Like the toxic positivity that's in there. We want to be able to truly recognize the issues. Then of course, dismantle, which is not a new word to ruckus makers. We're
Mm-mm.
we're essentially going in, with a baseball bat or something and just breaking down these systems that aren't serving our students. And of course, when you're making a ruckus, it should feel messy. And
Mhm.
and so going back to any last ideas on making a ruckus, it's does it feel easy? Because if it feels too easy, I would encourage and maybe challenge our ruckus makers to think about where can they push back more? Where can they push harder? And where can we see these inequities? Because it should feel messy. It should feel like a ruckus. You should see smoke.
Well, Lena, you can put a message on all school marquees around the world for a single day. What would your message read?
It's always standards plus justice. I always tell people, any educator I work with, you don't have to choose. If there's an equity conference and a conference on content, I challenge us to take those two ideas and combine them. Combine them so that we're not choosing between standards and justice. We can do both and we can achieve both.
You're building your dream school from the ground up. You're not limited or constrained by any resources. Your only limitation is your ability to imagine. So, how would Lena build her dream school? What would be the three guiding principles?
All right, ready for this. So, principle one, I want us to put justice at the forefront. And when I think about justice, before I used to say social justice, but now I think
Mhm.
about racial justice, climate justice, liberatory education,
Yeah.
thinking about, do students have a just pathway in their learning? And then going back to number two, well rounded instruction. Do not take away STEM, science, art, music, the things that students love and probably the most engaging aspects of instruction. Don't take it away in the name of
Mm.
math and ELA. See how we can create interdisciplinary and well rounded instruction. And three, belonging, always ensuring that your students feel a sense of belonging, whether they're connected to a mentor or whether they're connected to a group of students or anything, any sort of idea where students are like, I feel like I want to be here. I have a sense of love.
We covered a lot of ground today, Lena. So, of everything we discussed, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
I really just want to reiterate this. And that is, I want to ask our fellow ruckus makers, where are they feeling like they want to speak up? And when
Mm.
they do want to speak up, what stops them? Because that is exactly, what started my journey was I had the confidence in my squad and I had the what do you call strength to
Mm.
actually answer the employee survey. I really thought that they wanted to know our thoughts, but they didn't. So, so I always tell the last thoughts, the last takeaways would be answer that employee survey. You let them know and know that yes, it may come with consequences. However, if we're not fighting and if we're not taking up space, especially on behalf of our students, then who will?